On July 13, 2026, the U.S. president is standing at a podium, right? And he threatens to basically wipe a mountain completely off the map.
Right, Pickaxe Mountain.
Exactly, this Iranian underground complex. And, I mean, the rhetoric is just incredibly severe. It's exactly what you'd expect for a major military escalation.
Yeah, super aggressive.
But then, literally in the exact same breath, he openly admits that there's absolutely no visible activity at the site.
Nothing at all.
Right. Nothing happening. No heat signatures, no trucks moving, literally nothing that would suggest an active threat.
It creates this massive cognitive dissonance.
Oh, totally.
Because you have the commander-in-chief justifying the obliteration of a target that they are simultaneously acknowledging is, entirely dormant.
Yeah.
It completely defies the basic cause and effect logic we usually associate with military action.
Mm-hmm.
Where a visible action demands a proportional reaction.
Right. Okay, so let's unpack this, because that contradiction, it isn't just a political gaffe or a slip of the tongue.
It's definitely not.
It is actually the defining symptom of a system that is just completely broken down.
Completely.
So today, we are taking a deep dive into this really dense, highly analytical research paper from July 2026.
Right, published in the Law, Strategy, and International Affairs Journal.
Exactly. It's titled The Self-Certifying War. And our mission today is basically to decode how the current conflict with Iran accidentally destroyed its own rulebook.
Yeah, we're going to explore how a modern war ends up running on autopilot, simply because the very instruments used to measure its success or failure were just blown up on day one.
It's wild. But before we get into the mechanics of how that actually happens, we should probably issue a caveat to you, the listener.
Yes, a very explicit caveat. The source material we're dissecting today, it covers highly charged, ongoing geopolitical events.
Right, involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
Exactly. So our role in this deep dive is strictly to neutrally report the analysis. We're just laying out the timeline and the factual record exactly as it's presented in this research paper.
We are definitely not endorsing any political viewpoint.
No, we're not taking sides, and we are not advocating for any particular military or diplomatic strategy here.
Right. Our goal is purely to help you understand the structural and the legal frameworks the author is presenting.
Exactly.
Because whether you are a student of military strategy, or you follow international law, or honestly, if you just want to actually understand the mechanisms driving the headlines you see every day.
This is going to fundamentally change how you view warfare.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Because this conflict, it just isn't functioning like the wars in history books.
No, not at all.
This is really about what happens when data dies. It's about what happens when the truth basically becomes privatized.
So to understand why a leader would threaten an inactive target in the first place, we first have to understand the architectural design of this specific type of conflict.
Okay, we'll lay it out for us.
So the paper points out that the campaign against Iran was never actually pitched as a traditional, open-ended war of conquest.
Right, or like regime change.
Exactly. It was structured as what the author calls a standing conditional.
A standing conditional, meaning it runs entirely on an if-then logical loop.
Yeah, think of it kind of like a computer program running in the background of international relations.
Okay.
The doctrine was governed by two very specific, very publicly declared rules. Rule number 1, strike again if the nuclear program is reconstituted.
And rule number 2?
Stop when hostilities end. It is literally warfare reduced to a set of conditional clauses.
Wow. Okay. So it's kind of like setting up a legal system or, I don't know, even a sports game.
Right.
Like if a player steps out of bounds, the whistle blows. If A happens, we execute B.
Exactly. But for any system built on conditions to actually function in reality, you absolutely need a referee.
Right. You need an independent party looking at the field who has the authority to actually say, yes, that player's foot was on the line.
The condition has been met.
Exactly.
Because a conditional doctrine requires an adjudicator. Without an instrument whose findings are binding on both the party launching the strikes...
The U.S. in this case.
Right, and the international community judging those strikes, the whole system just collapses into total subjectivity.
It just becomes arbitrary.
Completely. And in the realm of nuclear counterproliferation, that referee was never supposed to be national intelligence agencies.
Oh, interesting.
The designated referee was the International Atomic Energy Agency's safeguard system.
The IAEA. The inspectors on the ground.
Exactly.
Okay, let's dig into what that actually looked like, because I think a lot of people hear the word inspectors and they just picture, like, a few guys walking around with clipboards.
Right. It was way more than that. It was this incredibly rigorous, deeply invasive architecture.
What are we talking about here?
We're talking about declared inventories, meticulous materials accountancy down to the gram.
Down to the gram.
Yeah. 24/7 encrypted camera feeds, physical tamper evidence seals on the nuclear materials.
And unannounced visits, right?
Right. Regular unannounced inspector access to the facilities. It relies on this foundational concept the IAEA calls continuity of knowledge.
Continuity of knowledge. So essentially a flawless, unbroken chain of custody.
Exactly. And we really have to look at the historical context to understand why that specific phrase is so important.
Right, because this didn't just come out of nowhere.
No, the modern safeguard system was fundamentally reshaped in the aftermath of 1991.
Oh, right, the Gulf War.
Yeah.
Wow.
After the Gulf War, the international community discovered that Iraq had been running this massive, completely undeclared nuclear weapons program right alongside the civilian program.
The civilian program that the IAEA was happily inspecting at the time.
Exactly. The shock of that discovery taught the non-proliferation world a really hard lesson.
Which is?
That a nation's declaration is totally meaningless without verifiable, continuous proof that materials aren't being diverted out the back door.
Right. But, okay, I have to challenge the premise a little bit here, though.
Sure.
Even when the IAEA inspectors were on the ground in Iran, with all those cameras and the seals and everything, the intelligence agencies were constantly arguing about the timeline anyway.
That's true.
Like, the referee was on the field, but nobody seemed to agree on the state of the game.
Well, what's fascinating here is that the paper actively builds on that exact reality.
Oh, it does?
Yeah, the presence of the verifier didn't magically create some utopia of interpretive consensus.
Right.
Just look at the week before the June 2025 strikes. The inspectors were still in the country, the cameras were rolling.
Yeah.
Yet the official U.S. intelligence community assessment stated Iran had made, quote, no decision to build a weapon.
Okay, so that's the official assessment.
Right. But meanwhile, the CIA director goes to the White House and argues they are, quote, very close.
Oh, wow.
And at the exact same time, Israeli intelligence services are briefing that the timeline is exactly 15 days.
So literally everyone is staring at the exact same ledger, looking at the exact same referee, and completely disagreeing on what it means.
Exactly. But notice what they are disagreeing about.
What do you mean?
They are fiercely debating the implications of the data, but they are all forced to anchor those disagreements to a single, neutral, counted stockpile of uranium.
Ah, I see.
The referee didn't create a consensus on intentions, but it priced the disagreement to a specific, undeniable number.
So the intelligence agencies could argue whether 15 days or 15 months was the right interpretation, but they couldn't argue about how many kilograms of material were sitting in the warehouse.
Right, the material was a hard fact.
And that shared factual baseline, that is the only thing that keeps a conditional war intact.
Precisely. You cannot have a rule that says strike if they reconstitute unless everyone agrees on what the current baseline constitution of the program actually is.
Which brings us to the core thesis of the research paper.
Right. What happens when the first act of your conditional war obliterates the very referee you need to justify the second act?
Man. Okay, this takes us directly to the June 2025 strikes.
Yeah.
And reading the physical details of this operation in the paper, it's staggering.
It was massive.
From a purely military kinetic standpoint, the initial strikes were a huge success.
Yeah, we're talking about roughly 22,000 centrifuges at the Natanz and Fordo facilities being destroyed or severely disabled.
22,000.
Yeah.
That is wild. And the uranium conversion line at Isfahan was just completely wiped out?
Right. For the first time in 2 decades, independent auditors were looking at the wreckage and basically saying Iran had no defined immediate pathway to weapons-grade material.
So in terms of hardware, the military campaign delivered exactly what it promised. It bought time.
It physically delayed the timeline. But the paper introduces this concept it calls the legibility trade.
The legibility trade.
Yeah.
Meaning you trade your ability to read the situation for a temporary delay in the enemy's timeline.
Exactly. Because in the exact same week that those 22,000 centrifuges were reduced to scrap metal, the informational ledger was just slammed shut.
Oh, right. Because the IAEA inspectors were withdrawn.
Yes, for their safety and for political reasons.
Right.
And they have not returned to the struck site since. So the strikes paid for that physical delay with total permanent informational blindness.
And to really grasp the weight of this blindness, the paper highlights the final entry in that IAEA ledger before the inspectors were pulled out.
The famous 440.
Right. The last verified number was exactly 440.9 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%.
That number is just monumental.
Because it was held at declared sites, under physical seal, watched by cameras, and verified by human inspectors.
Yeah. And just to give you a sense of scale, if that specific amount of material were further enriched to 90% weapons grade.
What are we talking about, like one bomb?
No, it's roughly enough for 10 nuclear devices.
Okay.
But the moment the inspectors left and the cameras went dark, that continuity of knowledge was completely severed.
And it's not a temporary severance, right? It's not like you could just send the inspectors back in 2 years later, dust off the cameras, and pick up where you left off.
No, absolutely not. Once the chain of custody breaks, it is gone forever.
Forever.
Because even if some future diplomatic miracle occurs and an inspectorate returns to Iran, they wouldn't be resuming the old ledger.
They'd have to start over.
They would have to completely restart a new one. And because they haven't had eyes on the material for years, they would have to base that new ledger entirely on whatever baseline Iran claims is true today.
Wow. So that 440.9 kilogram number is now what the paper calls an orphaned fact.
Yes, it is the final frozen entry in a book that no one can ever reopen.
That is genuinely terrifying. But okay, I can hear a listener right now screaming at their device saying, but we have the most advanced surveillance technology in human history.
Right, the satellite argument.
Yeah, like we have satellites watching Isfahan 24/7. We can read a license plate from low Earth orbit. Why do we need guys with clipboards?
It's a fair question, and the source addresses that exact counterargument, and it exposes this massive flaw in how policymakers understand intelligence.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, officials came out in March 2026 claiming they had constant, unblinking satellite surveillance of the Isfahan tunnel complex.
Right, saying they had high confidence they would see any movement.
Exactly, but the paper points out a fundamental structural conflation. Surveillance detects motion. Safeguards verify inventory.
Oh.
A satellite camera sees a convoy of trucks leave a tunnel. It can track those trucks for hundreds of miles.
But it has absolutely no idea what is actually inside the canisters loaded onto those trucks.
Exactly. The limits of overhead surveillance were starkly exposed that very same month.
What happened?
A major American newspaper had to completely retract a highly detailed, interactive satellite imagery graphic they had published about the Iranian sites.
Seriously, why did they retract it?
Because their visual investigations team, after consulting with actual experts, ultimately couldn't even prove that the structure they had labeled as a tunnel was actually related to the nuclear program at all.
You were kidding.
No.
Yeah.
It could have been a conventional munitions depot. It could have been a water storage facility. They just didn't know.
So the fundamental premise that makes a preventive strike seem rational, this confident belief that we will know before they build a bomb, we will see it coming.
Yeah.
That premise was completely consumed by the strike itself.
That's beautifully put, and it's exactly what the paper argues. The epistemic condition that licensed the first strike cannot be carried forward to license the second.
Because the layer that produced that confidence, the inspectors physically inside the sites, a stockpile under a tamper-proof seal.
It's the very thing the ordinance destroyed. The premise simply did not survive its own conclusion.
Which leaves us in this incredibly dark, incredibly volatile situation. The program is completely opaque.
Yes.
So we have to ask the uncomfortable question. If the stated rule of this war is we will strike again if the program is reconstituted.
Right.
How on earth does the U.S. military decide if that condition has been met when they have literally no empirical way to measure it?
Well, this brings us to the first major structural consequence of the legibility trade. The paper introduces the concept of the privatized trigger.
The privatized trigger. Okay, explain that.
Without the IAEA serving as the neutral international referee, the power to declare a target reconstituted doesn't just disappear.
Right, someone still has to make the call.
Exactly. It migrates. It migrates away from a treaty-bound international body and into the hands of whichever interested intelligence service manages to reach the decision desk in Washington first.
Oh, wow. So the truth literally becomes private property. It belongs to whoever's holding the microphone.
And we can see the disastrous results of this privatization play out vividly with the Pickaxe Mountain Complex, also known as Kolan Gaz Law.
Right. This site became the first live, real-world test of the privatized trigger.
Yes, and the divergence of facts here is just wild.
Let's talk about the timeline for that, because it's crazy. In the autumn of 2025, You have Israeli intelligence formally claiming that Iran has moved thousands of advanced centrifuges deep into this mountain complex.
Right, and they convey this assessment to Washington, and it is aggressively used to pressure the president to resume a broad bombing campaign.
But at the exact same time,
Senior U.S. and Israeli security sources are holding closed-door briefings for journalists, claiming the exact opposite.
the exact opposite.
Yes, they are telling reporters that the site is not operational, that there is no enrichment happening, and that it poses no current threat whatsoever.
That is just baffling.
A senior correspondent for the Jerusalem Post actually recorded his own frustration in print.
What did he say?
He noted he simply couldn't reconcile the off-the-record briefings he was getting with the alarming relocation reports being pushed by other factions of the same government.
And then you have independent nuclear scientists like David Albright sitting in the middle of this chaos, right?
Yeah.
Reviewing satellite imagery of dirt being moved and simply saying that the relocation of centrifuges is, quote, plausible.
Plausible, the cautious grammar of probability, set against the absolute grammar of certainty coming from the intelligence agencies who actually have political stakes in the outcome.
Right. So what does this all mean for a policymaker trying to actually make life or death decisions?
It means you have organs of two closely allied governments issuing totally contradictory facts in the exact same weeks to different audiences to achieve different political ends.
And there's no instrument left in the world to prove either of them right or wrong.
That is the essence of a privatized casus belli, a privatized justification for war.
It can just be manufactured in either direction depending on the political winds.
Precisely. You can drive toward escalation by asserting the mountain is full of centrifuges, or you can drive toward restraint by denying it.
And there's no objective fact to embarrass either move. Reality becomes whatever the dominant political faction needs it to be that day.
It devolves into sheer rhetorical gymnastics. And the paper meticulously tracks how this plays out in the official White House descriptions of the Iranian nuclear target over a 13-month period.
Oh, this part is enough to give you whiplash.
The instability of the target's description is prior to the verification collapse, and it is profound enough to void the entire conditional clause of the war.
So let's trace that timeline. In June 2025, right after the strikes, the official line from the podium is that the Iranian program has been obliterated.
That is the standing claim of military success.
Right. Then we get to February 2026. The administration needs to justify a new, limited campaign, so suddenly the program is described as an imminent threat.
It goes from obliterated to imminent in months.
And then in July 2026, when the U.S. is desperately trying to justify this controversial nuclear technology deal with Saudi Arabia, the president groups Iran with the UAE, citing them as a precedent for civil non-military use.
Think about the logical incoherence of that. Obliterated, imminent threat, accepted civil use.
All applied to the exact same program within a 13-month window.
How do you verify the reconstitution of a thing that is simultaneously destroyed, about to arrive, and completely peaceful?
You can't. Even if you magically teleported the IAEA inspectors back into the country today, they wouldn't even know which of those three contradictory realities they had been sent to find.
It's like we treated a Geiger counter for a crystal ball.
Right. We moved from measuring physical uranium isotopes to guessing what a leader might be thinking on any given Tuesday.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. The trigger migrated from a measurable physical material to an unmeasurable mind.
Wow.
By late July 2026, the intelligence assessment doing the heavy lifting of justifying the ongoing conflict wasn't about the RPMs of centrifuges.
It was entirely about the psychological intentions of the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei.
Exactly.
A man who, and the paper makes a huge point to mention this, hasn't even been seen in public since he took power.
American agencies released assessments stating he is more open to pursuing a weapon than his father was, but they carefully caution that this psychological profile is based largely on pre-war intelligence.
It's just a guessing game.
The paper notes this is a complete, disastrous reversion to the pre-2015 era of intelligence gathering.
Right, back before the Safeguards Agreement, when analysts basically spent their days trying to parse the elder Khamenei's public utterances.
Weighing the theological weight of religious fatwas against nuclear weapons and engaging in these endless circular debates about taqiyya.
Taqiyya, the practice of religious dissimulation.
Right.
Which basically meant that every time Iran denied having a weapons program, intelligence analysts could just read that denial as proof of concealment.
You literally couldn't falsify the suspicion. A denial was a lie, and silence was guilt.
And the 2015 safeguards architecture was the intelligence field's one great escape from that endless loop of mind reading.
Yes. It allowed them to move into actual empirical materials accountancy. And the 2025 strikes reversed that escape entirely.
So the foundational clause of the war strike, when reconstituted, is now just empty grammar.
It has no verifier, no stable object to verify, and no objective threshold.
Okay, so if the military trigger to start shooting is based purely on a politician's imagination, there has to be a legal fail-safe to stop them.
Right.
Like, the law must step in somewhere to hit the brakes.
You would expect the legal framework to provide a hard stop. But the paper reveals that if the renewal condition collapsed in physical space, the termination condition collapsed in legal space.
And it happened through the exact same mechanism of self-certification.
Yes.
We're talking about the War Powers Resolution. For anyone who hasn't taken a constitutional law class recently, this is the 1973 statute designed to limit the president's ability to wage endless war without congressional approval.
And the entire mechanism of that law runs on one load-bearing word: hostilities.
Hostilities.
The initiation of hostilities by U.S. forces triggers a 60-day statutory clock. If Congress does not formally authorize the military action within those 60 days, the president is legally required to remove the armed forces.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
And conversely, the end of hostilities stops and releases the clock.
Right. The entire statute assumes that the existence of hostilities is an observable, empirical, contestable fact in the real world. Bullets are flying, or they aren't.
But the paper details this unbelievable legal maneuver the administration pulled in April 2026 to hack that clock.
Oh, it is a remarkable, deeply cynical legal hack.
Break it down for us.
When a fragile, temporary ceasefire was signed in early April, the White House unilaterally took the legal position that hostilities had formally terminated.
Okay.
Because they declared them terminated, they claimed the 60-day statutory clock reset back to zero.
But wait, the paper explicitly notes that contemporaneous press reporters literally on the ground were showing that missile attacks and drone strikes were still happening on both sides during the supposed termination.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture of a self-certifying war, you see the paradox perfectly.
Right.
The operative statutory term hostilities was defined, applied, and its legal consequences were harvested by the exact same party that the clock exists to constrain.
That's insane. The brake is reading its own speedometer.
The party constrained by the law is the one defining whether the law applies to them on any given day, and once they realized they could do it, they just kept doing it. Each tactical pause and resumption of the conflict was declared, dated, and legally characterized by the White House, completely insulated from the physical reality on the ground.
It gets even more surreal when you look at the June truce. The paper calls it a phantom treaty.
The Phantom Treaty.
Yeah. Both the U.S. and Iran signed this memorandum. There are signatures on a page. And then within a matter of days, both leaders publicly disavow the very thing they just signed.
The supreme leader in Iran announced he had assented to the deal pragmatically, but without agreeing to it as a matter of principle.
And the American president later went on television and described it as a test that didn't mean much of anything.
Right.
Why even sign it then? How does a treaty exist if both sides say it doesn't matter?
Well, the paper provides great context here, noting that modern peacemaking practice has often reached for instruments whose legal character is deliberately unclassifiable.
Like what?
Think of the 2015 Minsk package of measures regarding Ukraine. It wasn't quite a treaty, wasn't quite a ceasefire.
Why did they do this?
Because a document that isn't clearly a formal treaty sits safely beyond the reach of the domestic and international laws that would normally bind it.
Ah, I see.
An instrument certified only by its author's immediate disavowals isn't an anomaly in this war. It's the genre working exactly as designed. It creates the illusion of diplomacy while preserving total freedom of action.
That makes a dark kind of sense. But the self-certification, it doesn't stop at just resetting legal clocks or signing fake treaties. It bleeds into the actual human math of the war, the casualties.
This is perhaps the most chilling example of the legibility trade in the entire paper.
Yeah, this part was rough to read. In late July, the Pentagon's public official ledger recorded 18 American service members killed in the conflict.
18.
By Thursday of that exact same week, the figure on the website had been quietly changed to 14.
They erased 4 dead soldiers from the official ledger.
How does a government legally or morally justify erasing its own dead?
Military officials, speaking anonymously to the press, explained the arithmetic. They said that 4 soldiers who were killed in mid-July during strikes on U.S. outposts in Jordan and northern Iraq
Yeah.
had been removed from the Iran war count because their deaths occurred after the April declaration that hostilities had ended.
Wait, let me make sure I understand this. Because the White House legally declared the war pause to reset the war powers clock, the soldiers who were blown up during that pause are legally categorized as not having died in the war.
That was the anonymous bureaucratic explanation.
That is just, wow.
To make matters even more convoluted, the official Pentagon spokesman refused to confirm that, instead attributing the changing numbers to temporary data disruptions.
Data disruption.
And the president, completely ignoring his own Defense Department's ledger, just kept saying the number was 18 in his public speeches.
The commander-in-chief is publicly counting 4 dead people that his own military's ledger insists do not exist.
When the operative term of a war is a self-description, even the arithmetic of the dead becomes an editable field in a spreadsheet.
That's horrifying.
The exact same self-certification that allows the administration to reset the statutory clock is the self-certification that allows them to reclassify combat deaths out of existence to manage public perception.
You would think this is exactly where Congress steps in. Like, the whole point of the War Powers Resolution is congressional oversight. And the paper does mention they actually held a vote to stop this.
They did. On July 23rd, the House of Representatives adopted a resolution by a vote of 214 to 208, directing the president to remove armed forces from hostilities.
Okay, so it's a real, dated, on-the-record vote by the legislative branch demanding an end to the war. The brake did get pulled. The system worked.
Well, you have to look at the mechanism. The instrument Congress chose to use was a concurrent resolution, H-Con Res 89.
Meaning?
By definition, a concurrent resolution does not carry the force of law, and it is not presented to the president for a signature or veto.
So it's basically just a strong suggestion.
Right. And the paper points out this specific mechanism has been under a massive constitutional cloud since 1983, when the Supreme Court decided the Chadha case.
Which did what?
It fundamentally struck down the concept of the legislative veto. So Congress uses a structurally non-binding, legally dubious instrument to loudly direct an end to the war.
But wait, you have to look at what they did the very day before that vote. This is the part that exposes the absolute theater of it all.
Oh, yes. The day before they bravely voted to end the war, House Republicans advanced a legislative plan providing up to $73 billion in supplemental war funding specifically for the Iranian conflict.
They voted to end the war on Tuesday while actively writing a $73 billion check to fund the war on Monday.
Exactly. The paper makes a profound philosophical point here. It concludes this isn't simply political hypocrisy.
Why not?
Because hypocrisy requires a standard being betrayed. What we are seeing is the signature of a standard that has no adjudicator whatsoever. When the executive branch is self-certifying, the legislative external oversight degrades into nothing more than gesture plus money.
They fund the kinetic reality of the war while voting for the political fantasy of ending it.
A gesture plus money.
So the trigger is broken, relying entirely on mind reading. The legal brake is hollowed out, reading its own speedometer, editing its own casualties, and funded by a Congress performing pantomime.
Right.
But a standardless war can't just float in the ether forever. It has to hit a physical wall eventually. If the law and the intelligence can't stop the machine, what is the actual clock dictating this war now?
Strip away the trigger clause, strip away the termination clause, ignore all the legal maneuvering, and there is exactly one ledger still being kept in this conflict.
Hey, what's that?
It is kept involuntarily, it is kept nightly, and it is kept in public whether the U.S. wants it to be or not.
The munitions ledger.
The magazine. The physical stockpile of weapons.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because the paper gives us the hard data on this, and it explains why the military is quietly panicking.
Right.
By the time of the June ceasefire, the U.S. military had already expended over 1,000 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles.
Over 1,000.
And 1,100 JASSM, the Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missiles. And crucially, they had burned through a massive share of their high-end air defense interceptors.
We're talking the TEDAT systems, the SM-3s used by the Navy, and the Patriot batteries.
And we really have to explain why those specific systems matter so much.
Right.
A JASSM or an SM-3 isn't a bullet you can stamp out in a factory in 10 minutes.
Oh, not at all. These are incredibly complex, multi-million-dollar pieces of aerospace engineering.
Right.
They require proprietary technology, rare materials, and highly specialized solid rocket motors. The defense industrial base supply chain is incredibly brittle.
And the replacement timelines for those systems approach 4 or 5 years.
Years, yes.
The head of Indo-Pacific Command literally went before Congress in April, sat at the witness table, and said on the record, there are finite limits to the magazine.
The war is literally eating its own tail.
You fire a missile on a Tuesday afternoon to blow up an empty tunnel, and you have to wait half a decade for the factory to build you a new one.
And the tragic part is that none of this was a surprise to the military planners.
It wasn't.
No. The paper points out that the logistics experts who watched defense supply chains had war-gamed this exact arithmetic 3 years before the war even began.
Really?
Yes. They published a classified finding that leaked, plainly titled, Empty Bins.
Empty bins.
The war game projected that high-end munitions inventories simply would not survive the opening weeks of a peer or near-peer conflict at current industrial production rates.
So the war is no longer being paced by the supreme leader's intentions or the president's legal clocks. It's being paced by the factory line in Lockheed Martin or Raytheon facilities.
Precisely, and the evidence of this is highly operational. Military commanders have actively shifted away from the expensive long-range standoff missiles they are now desperately trying to husband for future conflicts.
Instead, they're using cheaper alternatives like JDAMs. Explain what a JDAM is, just for context.
A JDAM is a Joint Direct Attack Munition. It's essentially a relatively cheap GPS guidance kit that you strap onto an older, dumb gravity bomb to make it a precision weapon.
But because it's a gravity bomb, the aircraft has to fly much closer to the target to drop it.
Right. As a result, the strikes in July were hugging the Iranian coastline, avoiding the deep penetration strikes into the interior of the country that require those scarce, long-range standoff weapons.
The physical reach of the war is shrinking. Not because the strategic objectives have changed, but because they simply don't have the inventory to reach any further into the country.
The geography of the war is set by the replacement timeline of the magazine. Because, again, the original objective, destroying the nuclear program, doesn't exist in a measurable form anymore.
Which leads to this incredible concept the author outlines called metric migration.
Metric migration.
Because the nuclear goal is unmeasurable, the war just annexes measurable proxies. It desperately needs something it can count to prove it's still doing something.
Right. When an organization can't measure its primary objective centrifuges, it naturally re-anchors its justification on whatever remains countable in its immediate environment.
In this war, the proxy metric became maritime transit in the Strait of Hormuz.
The paper shows how the entire focus of the war violently shifted. The Naval Institute, Chatham House, the Washington Post observers with totally different institutional agendas all agreed on this.
Agreed that within a matter of weeks, the unreadable nuclear file slid completely down the priority list, and physical control of the waterway became the actual war.
And then, as the paper brilliantly puts it, the migration monetized.
Oh man, this is the part that is just hard to wrap your head around economically and legally.
It's wild.
The U.S. administration, which had previously spent decades insisting that no country could legally charge tolls on an international waterway.
Defending the principle of freedom of navigation.
Exactly. They suddenly reinstated a blockade on the strait and announced a 20% toll on all commercial cargo passing through.
They claimed it was a guardian reimbursement for providing security.
And the most surreal part, Iran's foreign minister actually endorsed the underlying principle of charging a toll.
The two warring parties agreed on the monetization of the strait. They only quibbled over who should collect it and what the rate should be.
The war is literally charging rent on its own proxy metric. They abandoned the nuclear issue to become armed toll collectors.
It is a stunning normalization of a completely shifted standard. But there is an even darker, more strategically dangerous side to the munitions clock, and it involves those high-end interceptors we mentioned earlier.
The SM-3s and TADs.
Right. The paper describes the U.S. interceptor stock as an audited reserve.
But wait, the U.S. government is notoriously secretive about its stockpile numbers. Audited by whom?
Audited nightly by the adversary.
By Iran.
Yes. The exact size of the interceptor stock is opaque to U.S. taxpayers and lawmakers. The Secretary of Defense goes on television and insists stockpiles are robust. The Pentagon claims the arsenal is more than equal to the task. But every time Iran launches a salvo of cheap drones and ballistic missiles against allied bases in Jordan or the Persian Gulf, it forces the U.S. to fire those interceptors, and it returns an interception rate.
And that interception rate is the inventory speaking out loud.
Exactly.
So Iran is essentially stress testing the American magazine every single night, firing cheap drones to force the U.S. to fire multi-million-dollar missiles.
Yes.
And reading the resulting data that the U.S. military won't even give to its own congressional oversight committees.
The U.S. arsenal is being audited by the party firing at it and by no one with legal authority over it.
That is...
And the strategic crisis deepens when you look at where those interceptors are actually coming from to sustain this Middle East campaign.
Where are they coming from?
The U.S. has been forced to draw down stocks that were strategically prepositioned for the Indo-Pacific theater.
Stocks meant for defending Taiwan.
Exactly. The paper points out the massive legal inversion happening here. The Taiwan Relations Act contains a very strong codified statutory commitment by the United States to maintain Taiwan's defensive capacity against a potential Chinese invasion.
Yet the scarce interceptors required to fulfill that law are flowing away from that firm legal obligation and toward a Middle East campaign that was never formally authorized by Congress.
And has been actively voted against twice.
A completely discretionary military adventure is running the legal order of obligations in reverse.
You can't use an SM-3 missile twice.
Right. A missile fired over the Strait of Hormuz is a missile that cannot be fired over the Taiwan Strait. It's a zero-sum game of logistics.
Completely.
Okay, so we are in a trap, a deeply entrenched, self-certifying trap that is bleeding our global munitions reserves dry. How do we get out? The paper outlines two possible exits.
It outlines two structural exits, yes, but it quickly demonstrates why both of them are currently blocked by the very nature of the conflict.
Okay, let's look at exit one. Restore the verifier, bring back the IAEA or some equivalent neutral body.
In theory, yes. Restored inspector access, or the creation of a new international instrument with equivalent chain of custody standing, is the only off switch in this war that isn't tied to hitting the absolute bottom of the munitions magazine.
But practically, why won't that happen?
Practically, restoring a verifier requires intense bilateral cooperation.
Right.
Remember, the destruction of the safeguards instrument was a unilateral kinetic act by the United States, but restoring it requires Iran to agree at every single stage.
Negotiating terms, guiding inspectors, admitting them into highly sensitive suspect sites, allowing cameras to be reinstalled.
Exactly. And Iran's strategic incentives right now run entirely toward deeper opacity, not less. They are building the Pickaxe Mountain complex deeper and deeper into the bedrock, pouring opacity as architecture.
Why would they agree to fix a broken system if the broken system is working perfectly to their advantage?
They wouldn't. The paper states the geopolitical reality, plainly, self-certification is an asset to whoever holds the pen.
Right.
The informational defect advantages its holder, so the holder has absolutely no incentive to repair it.
Okay, what about exit two? Replace the standard entirely. End the war over something that is actually physically measurable, like those transit rights in the Strait of Hormuz.
This is a diplomatic proposal that is actually on the table, a multilateral administration of the strait, perhaps involving European or Asian partners.
Okay.
It substitutes a highly measurable termination condition, which is commercial transit verified by every single shipping company that sails through, for a totally unmeasurable one, which is nuclear reconstitution.
But the paper points out the massive, politically toxic catch to taking that exit.
The catch is that to take exit 2, the administration has to completely abandon the war's stated original objective.
Oh.
You can end the kinetic fighting, but you have to leave the nuclear question exactly as the June 2025 strikes made it: dark, disputed, unverified, and certified by no one.
Termination of the war and achievement of the war's goal part company entirely.
Yes.
You essentially have to stand in front of the American public and admit that the primary reason you started the war, the reason those soldiers died, and the reason you spent $73 billion is now fundamentally unsolvable.
Correct. And because no politician wants to admit that, policies that take neither exit more limited strikes, longer tactical pauses, more supplemental funding requests become the default.
They just leave both the trigger and termination clauses self-certify.
And leave the munitions magazine as the only actual clock ticking down the conflict.
Man. I want to ask about a historical exception the paper brings up, because I think it really helps prove the underlying rule of this whole theory.
Oh, the Al-Kibar strike.
Yeah. In 2007, Israel launched a surprise airstrike and destroyed a Syrian nuclear reactor at Al-Kibar. That reactor was undeclared, totally off the books, with no IAEA inspectors anywhere near it.
Right.
Why didn't that strike create a self-certifying loop of endless warfare, like we're seeing now with Iran?
It's a crucial boundary case for the author's theory. The difference between Syria in 2007 and Iran in 2025 wasn't the darkness of the nuclear program, it was the diplomatic clause attached to the strike.
What do you mean?
There was no declared conditional doctrine attached to the Al-Kibar strike. No Israeli official stood at a podium and said, "We will strike again if Syria attempts to rebuild."
Ah, they just blew it up and stayed quiet.
Because there was no declared condition of renewal, there was no epistemic standard to orphan. Blindness just yielded silence, not a self-fulfilling loop.
So the architecture of a self-certifying war requires three distinct things.
Right. A declared public commitment to renewed force based on a condition, the kinetic destruction of the neutral verifier of that condition, and an adversary who actively benefits from the resulting blindness.
It's the if-then rulebook itself that creates the trap. If you never write the rulebook, you can't get trapped by it.
Precisely. And I appreciate that the author of this paper is intellectually honest enough to provide a falsifier for their own thesis. They state very clearly under what specific conditions their structural diagnosis of the war would fail.
Right. They say that if both U.S. and Israeli intelligence converged on the meaning of the activity at Pickaxe Mountain, the thesis of a privatized chaotic trigger weakens.
Yes, but the key operative word in that falsifier is meaning. By late July, the two intelligence accounts actually had converged on the bare physical fact. Satellite imagery confirmed that at least some centrifuges had been moved into the mountain.
But the divergence simply relocated.
Exactly. It moved from debating whether the machines moved to debating what the move meant.
One side says they are moving them to start rebuilding the enrichment program. The other side says no, they're just preserving the remaining equipment by hiding it out of the range of American bombs.
And a conditional trigger clause runs on meaning, not on mere motion. Because the two agencies agree on the physical fact but completely diverge on the strategic meaning, the trigger remains contested.
Entirely subjective and easily manufacturable by politicians. The divergence persists, just on a more abstract level.
Exactly.
There is one final, almost darkly comedic piece to this puzzle in the paper, a coda that happened just as the research was going to publication. The July 22nd U.S.-Saudi nuclear agreement.
Oh, it is the perfect encapsulation of the incoherence of the era.
It really is. Well, the United States military is actively bombing the verification architecture on one side of the Persian Gulf and Iran.
The State Department is simultaneously negotiating a massive, peaceful nuclear cooperation agreement on the other side of the Gulf with Saudi Arabia.
And the kicker is what might be intentionally missing from that Saudi agreement.
The final text was still pending congressional review at the time of publication, but heavily attributed reporting suggested the U.S.-Saudi deal might completely lack the additional protocol.
For those who don't follow nuclear diplomacy, the additional protocol is the very thing that gives the IAEA its real teeth. It's the agreement that allows for the intrusive, short-notice, full-scope inspections we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. The paper notes the staggering historical juxtaposition here.
Right.
In the exact same week, the same U.S. administration managed nuclear verification as a purely discretionary favor.
He destroyed it by military force in Iran because they deemed it insufficient, and they potentially negotiated it away by contract in Saudi Arabia to secure a diplomatic win.
Legibility subtracted by high explosive ordnance on Monday and subtracted by diplomatic drafting on Tuesday.
The paper explicitly avoids attributing grand intent to any of this, doesn't it?
It does. It doesn't matter whether the administration brilliantly, cynically engineered this architecture to avoid accountability or whether they simply blundered into it through short-sighted tactical decisions.
It's unknowable and, frankly, immaterial.
The mechanism operates identically, and it pays its political dividends identically either way.
Okay, let me try to synthesize this incredible journey we've been on today.
Go for it.
A conditional war, a war that says we will strike if you rebuild, absolutely requires an independent adjudicator. It requires a neutral referee to call the fouls. By bombing the IAEA safeguards ledger in June 2025, the U.S. created a massive legibility trade. They bought a few years of physical delay, but they paid for it with permanent, irreversible informational blindness.
And that profound blindness caused the war's governing clauses to migrate completely inward, away from objective reality and into the realm of domestic politics.
The combatants now write their own rules in real time. The military trigger to strike is privatized to whoever gets to the decision desk first.
Shifting from measuring actual uranium to trying to read a reclusive supreme leader's mind.
And the legal brake to stop the war is hollowed out, allowing the White House to edit its own casualty numbers and reset statutory clocks while the bombs are literally still falling.
leaving a standardless, endless war that only keeps time by the bottom of the munitions magazine, draining resources meant for other global obligations.
It's a war that fights until the supply chains simply run out of missiles to feed it.
A standardless war will stop when it stops for a reason no one will be able to empirically certify, and it will be equally uncertifiable when someone inevitably decides to begin it again.
We want to leave you, the listener, with a final, provocative thought to mull over as you watch the news this week. Building on what we've discussed today, we've seen how destroying the epistemic standard of a physical nuclear program leads to a standardless, self-certifying loop of forever war.
But warfare is evolving rapidly away from just physical targets.
Exactly. As global conflicts increasingly shift away from physical territory and into complex, invisible infrastructure. Think about cyber networks, advanced AI fabrication plants, or massive, distributed biological data centers. Will every future tech-centric conflict become a self-certifying war?
It is the critical question for the next century of conflict. If you launch a preemptive cyber attack that destroys an enemy's servers or wipes their digital grid in the opening salvo to buy yourself time, do you permanently blind yourself to the very digital metrics you need to ever declare the war finished?
If the referee is digital and your opening move is to blow up the server, who blows the final whistle? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. It's been an absolute privilege unpacking this with you, and we hope it changes how you look at the conflicts shaping our world. We'll see you next time.